Summer of '85 is the new film by French director François Ozon. It's based off a British novel called Dance on My Grave, written by Aidan Chambers, and François Ozon actually has a pretty interesting personal relationship with the source material, in that it is a book that he read, I believe, when he was around 17, which is about the age of the two main characters in the film, and I imagine in the novel, and had such a personal connection with it that he decided that it would be the first film that he would direct. Now, as it happens, he's waited over 30 years to get to it, and it is actually his 10th film. But you can definitely sense that there is a very, very intense personal connection that the director has with the source material that he read as a young man, and that he transposed from Britain to the shores of Normandy. I suppose the film is going to invite a lot of comparisons with Call Me By Your Name, in that it is the exploration of a young, burgeoning love and sexual relationships between two young men. Now, I'm not the world's biggest fan of Call Me By Your Name, but I find that the personal connection that the director has with this source material makes it a more engaging watch for me, not to mention that I'm really not the biggest Luca Guadagnino fan. I also find that the film being grounded in a more realistic, more middle-class, working-class sort of environment really helps the world feel grounded and really helps the relationships feel real. I find that Call Me By Your Name really felt like this bourgeois fantasy that existed in this world that doesn't really exist, where people are wealthy and educated and tolerant, and it felt, like I said, a complete fantasy, whereas Summer of '85 has a far more grounded feel about it. The relationship between the two young main actors feels very genuine, very believable, and you kind of have these two stages of adolescence or of early adulthood. The main character, Alexis, really is experiencing his first love story, and as such is experiencing it in a way that's far more intense, where the highs are extraordinarily high, the lows extraordinarily low. He's experiencing jealousy for the first time, he's experiencing being possessive for the first time, and every sentiment, every feeling that he has is exacerbated by his lack of understanding, by his lack of experience. And of course for him, this is both the most intense love story that's ever existed, and ultimately when he is a little rejected, then of course it feels like the worst thing in the world. Whereas you have the older character, who I believe is a year or 2 years older, is already a little more experienced, and is maybe taking this relationship a little less seriously. An element of the film that I think low-key is one of the most interesting relationships in the film is actually the relationship between the main character Alexis and his parents, who are these very working class people, and particularly the relationship that he has with his mother, Isabelle Nanty, is very subdued, but at the same time, I feel extraordinarily grounded, again, is a word that I keep using. But I feel she's extremely well used, she's very touching in the film, and the relationship that she has with her son is very touching as well. I also feel like everything that has to do with the father could also be explored maybe a little bit more, but certainly what's there is very real, feels very genuine, and is one of the highlights of the film, in my opinion, and maybe could even be explored a little more. But I do feel that, yeah, that relationship that Alexis has with his parents is something that is very, very interesting, as well as the relationship that he develops with Melvil, Poupaud's character, who's this teacher, this French teacher, I believe, who really takes him under his wing and is very protective of this kid that he feels is very sensitive, but at the same time very talented, although again, I feel that that feels a little too movie for me. That sort of teacher-student relationship is something you see explored a lot in films and in literature, and just doesn't feel as realistic maybe as the relationship that he has in particular with his parents. The film is told from the perspective of Alexis, whom is out on his sailboat one day and is rescued by David, who's a little bit older, who is more secure in his personality, and who has this very outgoing, far more confident personality. They will fall in love, or at least what seems to be love for, a very, very young adolescent, but it will also end in a tragedy, and that's not spoiling anything. The opening of the film actually starts off with the death of one of the major characters of David. The film is then told through a series of flashbacks going back and forth between that summer of 85 and the relationship between Alexis and David, but also the fallout of David's death. Now, I'm not certain about the use of that structure for the film. I actually think it's a bit of a hindrance. I think the story would have been probably better if told in a more classic linear fashion, because ultimately it sort of introduces this suspense, which is in reality fake suspense, and thankfully so, because I don't want to spoil how David dies, but there's only really one way in which it makes sense, because otherwise it would take away from that grounded nature that the film has, and ultimately ends up being a little pathetic, which is fine. But I do think that the introduction of this supposed suspense probably wasn't the right way to go about telling the story. And one thing that I am certain is the voiceover the film utilizes is a massive hindrance. I don't think it's particularly well written. It is told from the point of view of Alexis, who's kind of recounting his memories. It is both trying to be sort of literary and, for lack of a better word, well written, but also come from the voice of a teenage boy with all the limitations that entails. And ultimately, it ends up being in that sort of middle ground that's kind of obnoxious, to where it's not particularly well written, but also doesn't feel true to the voice of its character. And I feel is probably the biggest issue that I had with the film that really took me out of it. That being said, I think François Ozon is quietly one of the, great directors working in France today, one of the great living French directors, and this is without a doubt a film that is worth seeking out. So as always, thanks very much for watching the video. Please be sure to hit the like button if you like the review, subscribe if you're new, and until next time, see ya.